Hello, my name is Veer Animus of VA Games, and we're back in Karg Island playing Battlefield 3. I understand, and apologize for the fact that this is the second consecutive video that I've put out featuring Karg Island. However, we had some games last night that I just could not ignore. We are again at bat for the Americans, flying the AH-1Z Viper. But before we begin, I would like to introduce another new gunner. This one is Moneymaker. He is a very talented gunner, but unfortunately I have not had much experience flying with him yet, and this is one of our premier matches together. And I think it turned out exceptionally well. Well enough that I felt a repeat video of Karg Island was not only okay or acceptable, but necessary. Now this is probably going to throw many of you off, but this is what I call a perfect helicopter game. Yes, we do crash and die several times throughout this video, and yes, I did previously describe a perfect helicopter game as one in which the pilots don't die. However, I do make a distinction between a flawless run and one that is kind of cinematically ideal for showcasing the skill of the pilots. My first video in this series was definitely an example of the first definition of a perfect helicopter match, since neither of us died, even though I do nearly wreck the chopper towards the middle, but that's neither here nor there. That is not to imply at all that my video was the first perfect helicopter match ever uploaded, because it obviously was not. I've seen many of this type of video, and I've noticed a commonality that pervades all of them, including my own to some degree. At the end of the day, a pilot gets a perfect run for a reason, usually several. Sure, one of those reasons may very well be that the pilot is, highly skilled and thus very difficult to shoot down. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible, and I'm sure it happens, but most of the videos that I've seen so far, especially, when we're talking about rush game types, is that the pilot doesn't really have very much actually trying to kill him. Of course, I don't mean that nobody ever tries to take the pilots down. That would be silly. I mean, everybody hates a good helicopter pilot. That includes myself. Some games, choppers can just go to town on infantry all day, slip a stray stinger lock or two, and end with a ridiculous score, having trounced an entire team of players that are either lacking experience, motivation, or both. I know it might sound like it, but I'm actually not trying to invalidate those kinds of games at all. I mean, I have fun with them, and I like them just as much as anyone else. All I'm saying is that the next time you watch another piloting video, including any of my own, ask yourself a few questions about it. How much pressure is the enemy team really putting on those pilots? Are there relentless stinger locks? Or is there an endless fleet of vengeful jet pilots? Or a jealous helicopter pilot? Maybe a cocky tank crew trying all at the same time to shoot them down? Maybe the issue wasn't even with the enemy team. Maybe the pilot was just lucky enough to have a maverick jet pilot, attracting the bulk of all their attention. Or maybe the pilot's infantry was oppressive enough to capture all the territory and keep all the enemy eyes on the ground. I'm just saying, examine the context of the video. See what's actually happening and the message that the uploader's actually trying to get across. Anyway, back to this video. I love this game because the teams were so well balanced. I joined the game already in progress, and by the time I joined, we were already losing by 100 tickets or so. The enemy had all the checkpoints, and it looked really bad for us. The entire game was a struggle. It was a drama, not just a meat grinder of spawn-killing noobs, just to jack up a kill-to-death ratio in a game where the kill-to-death ratio doesn't even matter. Well, I certainly can't speak for Moneymaker, much less anyone else involved in the game, but I was white-knuckling the entire thing from start to finish. There was a really dangerous squad on the other team with the gamertag Kuro. There were about 3 of them, and in this video, you get to see them everywhere doing everything. And the majority of that effort felt like it was personally against us. Those guys were good, but more importantly, they were persistent, highly versatile, and they worked really well together. Between the 3 of them, they deployed helicopters, jets, tanks with a CITV station and guided shells, laser-locking SOFLAMs, infantry with stingers, and laser-guided javelins. What's more is that they did most of those things at the same time with the cooperation of some of the other members of their team. You want to talk about stressful? I couldn't even guess what they were going to try next on us. Their team did an excellent job doing as much as possible to mitigate the threat that we posed to them. This is where Battlefield shines. It's closely matched teams jockeying for position, going back and forth with each other. Unfortunately, this kind of situation is a bit more rare than I should like. The game's core mechanics are such that battles typically start off as close to an equilibrium as possible. Ideally, the teams are going to have an equal number of players between them, and most maps give both teams equal vehicular resources and territorial proximity. It isn't perfect, but it is on paper a stable equilibrium. Then the match starts, and the players start interacting with that system. The entropy of the system increases, and that equilibrium is quickly destroyed. Once the fighting actually starts, it really doesn't take very much for one team to gain a discrete positional advantage by taking a critical checkpoint like Charlie on Caspian Border and Bravo on Operation Metro. Once that advantage is not just taken, but secured by one of the teams, the opposition has to fight an uphill battle to take it back. More often than not, this is going to result in that team getting ultimately scattered and pushed back into their deployment. At that point, the battle is really effectively over, and it was designed by DICE to end either just before this happens or just after. Maybe it's fun for the motivated players in the oppressed team to try to fight through that blockade, but that enjoyment is novel at best even for extreme players, and it never lasts for very long. You can only get spawn camped for so long before you say, alright, we get it, you win, let's start the next game. On some level, you have to know that the DICE developers knew this going in. Battlefield 3 is anything but their first rodeo. The default ticket counts are not arbitrary. They, like every single tiny detail of this game, were selected for a reason based on a stringent analysis of statistical data pertaining to the flow of battle on each map in each game mode. These maps were designed with the intent to go on just long enough to determine a winner, then move on to the next one. Of course, it isn't always perfect, and exceptions do apply, but it represented at least one of the most statistically sound solutions to that issue. DICE had the benefit of 19 releases worth of experience to take from when building Battlefield 3. Unfortunately, the delicacy of their finely tuned system was lost with the implementation of user-controlled rented servers. Now, regular players with absolutely no comprehension of design concepts could exchange money for the power to alter the parameters of that system. Aside from being an obvious money grab for DICE to take more money from players who already paid a fortune's worth at the door, rented servers would inconvenience players at best and utterly ruin experiences at worst. Emotional, irrational, uneducated, and unjustly entitled children of all ages held the fate of your Battlefield experience in their hands. Server owners could and often would kick or ban players guilty of nothing else but being better than them. If you kill a server owner or one of his admins too many times, you can get kicked. If your playstyle includes behavior that the owner or one of his admins don't agree with, such as attacking jets with helicopters, you can get kicked. If you get into a vehicle that a server owner or one of his admins wants to use, you can get kicked. If you use certain weapons, gadgets, or sometimes even whole classes, you can get kicked. If your in-game rank is too high, you can get kicked. You can actually get kicked out of a game just for your level. The problem is that this kind of thing is so common that it's actually considered a badge of honor to get kicked out of a game, however frustrating it may be. The problems don't end with players being kicked out of games for no reason either. Server owners will almost always change the default ticket rates to their servers, which results in a few different issues depending on the game mode. The obvious result is going to be longer matches. People like playing the game, so they want the game to go on for as long as possible. It's an entirely understandable, albeit short-sighted perspective. Let's take Conquest for example. Every single match of Conquest will eventually degenerate from a battle to a beatdown. Like I mentioned just before, each map is going to start off with the two teams as close to an equilibrium as possible, and it doesn't take long at all for that balance to come undone. Typically, this happens in about 5 to 15 minutes depending on some variables like team balance, players joining and leaving, team switching, and so on. Once it happens, the losing team is going to be sorely disadvantaged, and it'll spend the last 45 minutes of an hour-long Conquest match being needlessly spawn camped. We've all been there joining a game like this. Imagine 700 tickets to 500 in a match of Firestorm. The enemy has all 3 checkpoints, and the teams are 12 players to 7, because half of the defenders quit to spare themselves the pain of the spanking. For all intents and purposes, this game is over. Almost none of the defenders are making any kind of effort to break the spawn camp, because those that do are immediately punished by the enemy's tanks. They can't fly out either because their helicopter is being used against them by the enemies that stole it, and the jets keep strafing the base to blow up any jets on the runway that try to take off. We're only 15 minutes into this game, and it should be over, but it won't be for an additional 45 minutes or more because the server was set for matches to go on 5 times longer than they were supposed to. Any players that join in the receiving end of this pounding are going to leave immediately for the obvious reasons. Players already on that team are going to prematurely quit for the same. Even players on the offending team are likely to get bored and quit after a while. The only ones who really enjoy it are stat patters looking for easy kills to make their stats look more appealing to people they think they're going to impress. In Rush, the consequences are far more pronounced. Increased ticket rates are a direct handicap to the defending team in a Rush game, because it gives the attackers anywhere from 2 to 5 whole times more chances to destroy objectives, while not giving the defenders any compensation at all. There are other reasons why private servers are awful, and the most common rebuttal to any of these complaints is to avoid private servers and to play on official DICE servers.
Up in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane!
No, it's the point, and you missed it. DICE doesn't want you to play on their servers. They make official servers as plain and unappealing as possible to encourage people to use private servers. Why, I hear you ask? Because hosting servers requires resources, and resources cost money. Players who rent servers from DICE are literally paying DICE for a service that is typically free on any other platform in this genre. Well, I mean, it does work out sometimes, and this match is evidence of that. Superfred, Moneymaker, and I joined this game with just enough time to turn it around. And I'll be the first to boast that Moneymaker and I are a lethal helicopter team. But even I have to admit that we'd have been cut down to size if Superfred wasn't looking out for us on the ground. Just in case you haven't already noticed, the recurring theme of these videos is going to be teamwork. Just making that clear. Having Superfred on the ground in this game was invaluable. Ordinarily, I'll maintain direct, one-on-one communications with my copilot to be rid of confusing and unnecessary chatter from unrelated players. However, Superfred is familiar enough with mic etiquette such that he is one of the few that I would allow in our chat. He stays quiet unless he needs to vocalize relevant information, and keeps messages clear and concise. There was an extra set of eyes from the ground to warn me of jets posturing behind us or helicopters deploying from the enemy base. He also got us out of a few jams by applying pressure to enemy air vehicles with Stinger missiles. On top of directly assisting us in the sky, he called out enemy infantry and armor movements at critical intersections. This allowed us as the attack helicopter team to do our job of infantry support that much more efficiently, since it meant that we didn't have to manually search for these formations ourselves. That also meant that if the enemy was using a particular territory as a vantage point to shoot at us with anti-air provisions, we could ask Superfred to slip in while they kept their eyes to the sky looking for us and try to take them out. Flying a helicopter over an enemy-controlled checkpoint is a certain way to catch some heat from Stinger missiles. It was an enormous relief to have Fred on the ground capturing the checkpoints we needed our team to control to allow us in the air the freedom to fly where we need to fly. Of course, I'm also thankful for Moneymaker's Hawkeye, which saved us several times in this match alone. Moneymaker absolutely gets that he is the eyes of the helicopter. He pays attention to the ground and the sky seemingly at the same time. When I fly, I take the most difficult courses as low to the ground as possible to make it difficult for the enemies to track me or shoot me. This requires a great deal of concentration, especially when I'm evading a threat like a Stinger lock or an incoming air vehicle. And while I neurotically check my air radar for such threats, and believe me, it helps, I can miss something important if I'm performing an aerobatic insanity 2 meters off the ground. Having additional eyes helping me spot things that I might miss in my periphery is a benefit that cannot possibly be overstated. Now, the title of this video is Float Like a Butterfly, Sting Like a Viper. And that's not supposed to be just some kind of catchy play on words exploiting a famous quote. I mean, well, it is that, but it isn't just that. It's the philosophy of the mindset a pilot should be in when choosing a flight path. It is the Tao of piloting. Attack helicopters are extremely delicate, and while they can take some punishment, they can't take much. Just like in real life, attack helicopters are meant to slip in and support infantry, not sponge bullets for them. You need to be really careful how you approach the battlefield, and you need to be really aware of which teams control which checkpoints. The general algorithm that I use when flying in this game is this. Fly up as high as necessary to get a good bird's eye view of the action below. Scan the checkpoints and note their dispositions, like who is taking, losing, or holding which checkpoints. The gunner should use this opportunity to look around for targets. At this point, whatever the helicopter does is at the pilot's discretion. If the gunner does call out a target, the pilot has to be the one to determine whether or not they're capable of engaging the target, and whether or not they should, even if they could. More often than not, the pilot is going to have multiple options and will have to prioritize. For me personally, securing rearmost objectives is the #1 priority. This keeps routes clear for teammates to field both infantry and vehicles. Once the pilot has selected a target, the pilot must determine how to engage the target. This may include diving to below radar to put a strafe run on an enemy position, or it may involve gaining altitude on an unwary enemy helicopter. In the ideal situation, your targets will always be terrestrial. In these cases, it's usually best to dive below radar, fly over and through the target, then around some cover before looping around and coming back from another direction. In this respect, you want to move and attack in a helicopter the same way you want to move and attack as an expert sniper. Keep moving and maintain a low profile. Try not to attack the same target in the same way, on the same side multiple times, as this repetition is predictable and will eventually get countered. If the enemies are entrenched in a well-defended position and you can't approach it without getting blown out of the sky, pull back. Break line of sight by flying back as far as you need to, and change up your approach even slightly. Unload as much ordnance as you can before they start locking onto you, then immediately nose up, around and down, dive back to ground level and speed back to safety. Lather, rinse, and repeat until either you've overcome the position or your team on the ground does. If you persistently harry enemies in this way, you'll keep them off their balance with their focus split between ground and airborne attacks. For enemy pilots, your approach is going to vary greatly depending not only on your skill, but such factors as enemy skill, vehicle of choice, method of attack, and overall team disposition. I can offer a few examples of these. First, we'll talk about the jet pilots. Jet pilots are a mixed bag because offensively, jet pilots come really only in two flavors. Each flavor is about equally common, but each flavor is not even remotely equally efficient. When a jet is coming at you, one of two things is coming at you along with it. It's going to be heat seekers or cannon fire. I'll take this moment to address jet pilots directly now. Jet pilots. If you're attacking an enemy helicopter with heat seekers from your jet, and the enemy pilot is any good at all, that pilot is laughing at you. To a good helicopter pilot, heat seekers from an attacking jet are nothing but a nuisance, and are only a threat when coupled with other lock-on weaponry from other players, like other helicopters or stingers. Even then, this threat is situational at best. When I fly, I categorize enemy formations into three tiers: non-threatening, mild threat, and significant threat. Ordinarily, and just by their nature, jets are a significant threat to helicopters, for obvious reasons. However, the moment I detect that the jet pilot is earnestly trying to hit me repeatedly with heat seekers, they're demoted to mild threat. And in most cases, they border on no threat at all. Seriously, jets with heat seekers are a joke too lame to be even funny. Of course, that is only true if you know how to deal with them. To know how to deal with them, you need to know how they work. In the last video, I explained in painful detail how heat-seeking weaponry works. Moderately experienced jet pilots intuitively understand this and take advantage of it with a method that I refer to as dunking. A jet pilot will approach the helicopter and acquire the lock, then fly as fast as possible to get as close as possible to the helicopter before releasing the payload. The objective is to pull up and away at the last possible second, and the result is something that kind of looks like a dunk in basketball. The entire explanation is extremely complicated even for my taste, since it involves some trigonometry and angles. Suffice to say that if the helicopter dumps flares even exactly as the missiles are fired, forget after. The helicopter is probably going to take one or both hits directly. It's a clever, albeit tricky way for the jet pilots to penetrate the safety wall put up by countermeasures. However, helicopters can counter this counter to countermeasures by recognizing this method of attack and preempting the flare dump. Preempting the flare dump gives the flares enough time to fall away from the helicopter far enough to distract the missiles, and it's usually enough to deflect one or both of the warheads. Of course, exceptions always do apply, and skilled pilots should be prepared with an escape route if things don't work out this way. It isn't just preempting the flares alone that does the trick either. If you're on the receiving end of this kind of attack, you need to be pulling away before the jet fires the rockets. You want to put as much distance between the rockets and the flares, and then the flares and you as possible. Erratic, unpredictable movements are going to make it difficult for enemies to track you and prepare for a follow-up shot. Notice that when I engage enemies, especially at closer ranges and lower altitudes, I'll bob the helicopter up and down as well as sway the helicopter to the sides. When I flee from pursuers, I'll weave slalom style through the environment and plot an unstable zigzag away from the threat. A stationary target is an easy target. More often than not, jet pilots that insist on using heat seekers to attack you are going to be less skilled, and there's an unfortunate consequence to this. Their continued attempts to shoot you down are going to force you to be paying attention to them, and they'll immediately follow up each strafe with a marathon flight around the perimeter of the map. And with each strafe, the jet has enough time only to unleash one more volley of rockets before the helicopter's using his and the jet has to flee. Far away. Then the jet will circle around the map and come back for another try, but fail to understand that all he'll ever get is one volley of rockets at a time, and it takes more than one volley of rockets to disable a helicopter, let alone outright destroy it. It's a war of attrition that, if left to its own devices, will eventually result in the destruction of the jet pilot, since jets are customarily less successful at deploying countermeasures than a helicopter is. Eventually, I will get the vehicle disabled. While the heat-seeker-wielding jet pilots are typically a joke, their bigger, better wingmen is anything but. The main cannon of fighter jets can shred a helicopter, even a healthy one, in the matter of a single second, and experienced players that know how to use it can do this with great success. If a jet pilot is coming at you and has the opportunity to use heat seekers and deliberately chooses not to use them, you've just encountered a significant threat. That player has just demonstrated to you that he recognizes the futility of trying to down you with heat seekers, or at the very least recognizes the vast superiority of his repeated cannon. This, by itself, is considerably dangerous. In the event that such a pilot sets his gaze on you, you need to keep your eyes on that pilot at all times. If he starts shooting at you before you begin accelerating to evade him, by the time you pick up enough speed, it will already be too late. This is where erratic flying comes into play. You need to immediately initiate a corkscrew dive to the ground level, simultaneously toward the attacking jet and toward relative safety. Put a building, a hill, or any part of the environment between you and the attacker and pay attention how the jet responds. If the jet pilot knows what he's doing, he'll continue these attacks in short bursts using high-angle attacks to reduce the helicopter's ability to counterattack.
After all, it is dangerous, if not impossible altogether, for a helicopter to fly with its nose pointed straight up. When performed correctly, the jets are going to follow an inverted parabolic curve from the flight ceiling down at a steep angle to the helicopter with an asymptote that's just right over the height of the helicopter. This is an especially tricky situation, because moving in any lateral direction is going to put more distance between you and the jet, which in the last episode I told you is the last thing that you want to do. Of course, staying still is just as bad as it makes you an easy target. Unfortunately, this is a helicopter's kryptonite. Helicopters in these situations have a high mortality rate, and there's really no algorithmic approach that I could offer in order to mitigate this kind of threat. All you can do is bide your time and vary diving and climbing evasive maneuvers to give yourself the position that you need to fight back, or at least give your allies the time they need to deal with the jet for you. The more altitude you have against these kinds of enemies, the more opportunities you'll have to fight back. Of course, gaining altitude is going to make you more visible to other potential attackers like main battle tanks, stingers, helicopters, and of course other jets. You need to use your discretion here and make your moves dependent on the other pieces on the board. You are currently the king in check of a chessboard, and it's going to take a great deal of cunning to break the whole. Anyway, I do plan on doing a lot more of these specialized videos in the future concerning helicopter tactics. In those videos you'll see a lot of the ways that I deal with those dangerous jets as well as other helicopters. But we'll get to all of that and more in other videos. Before we cut this one off, I want to briefly mention that I'm going to be involved with an Extra Life 24-hour live stream for charity supporting the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It's going down on October 25th of this year, and I've never really done anything like this before, so I'm still trying to get organized. If you want to support me or anyone else taking part in this charity event, please feel free to contact me and I'll help you out the best I can. All of my contact information is in the video description, and I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to be partnering with Elu from knightsofhyrule.org, link in the description, and I'm definitely interested in any and all suggestions you have for games or challenges you'll want to see. Perhaps I'll even showcase a list of the games that I already have available. I'd even be willing to go out and purchase games that I don't already own for the purposes of this event. Anyway, I'll have more information in the coming weeks. In the meantime, this very long game is coming to an end. Fred, Moneymaker, and I were able to turn this hard-fought match around, and I can only hope the future matches are going to be that exhilarating. Fred, Moneymaker, and I were able to turn this hard-fought match around, and I can only hope that future matches are going to be that exhilarating. I do apologize, but I did have to trim the fat and cut out a few clips just for time constraints. This match went on for over 45 minutes, of which I played and recorded about 35. I just couldn't make a single video that long, and I hope you understand. And in closing, I want to thank you again for watching. I hope to see you next time.